I think the zero-sum game would be a gain on what's happened, because it's been less than a zero-sum game. It's been a loss of GDP. Do you think it's easier for companies, and do you think companies are trading more or less from the UK to the EU now than they were with this new regime?
Exports have gone up.
No, well, I'm talking about companies. Do you think there are any
companies...
You mean with
the...
Do you think there are companies that find it difficult now to export and to trade with the European Union?
There are companies where the changes have had an impact on them.
If this was horse racing, these figures are equivalent to going to the races with £490 or £500 or £400, and betting that money and losing that money. To be told you're winning £8 and £8 and £2 means you've got £18. But the bookie's not yet paid out. I'm asking you, do companies find it easier or harder now?
Most companies have said they've had to make changes, and some have had
easier
impacts.
or harder.
No, so it depends on the company. There is no.
Some companies, you think, find it easier to trade with the EU than they did when they were in the EU. So, Secretary, basically, what message is being sent by the government by merging business policy with trade policy? Has something run out of steam somewhere, do you think?
No, I wouldn't use those words. I would say that it's been an evolution because of where we are versus where we were 6-7 years ago. Leaving the EU meant that we needed to heavily prioritize a new independent trade policy function, and Liam Fox, being the first Secretary of State, almost imbued the department with his DNA. Even now, there's so many things that I see it. This is something that Liam Fox did. And now we are in a new phase. We've left the EU. We have had some continuity agreements. We have a new trading relationship with the EU. We've got an FTA with them. We also have new deals, upgrading them. Some are in the pipeline. But CPTPP, of course, is the big one that really presents a strategic shift. But the merger needs to be seen through the lens of the PM's 5 priorities, in particular economic growth. What we found was that DIT had become a business department, and we had 2 business departments talking to businesses, and stakeholders kept talking about having to talk to different people in different places. So this brings it all under one roof. And there will be synergies. There was actually quite a lot of duplication that was taking place. So we are trying to ensure that what we deliver now with business and trade is more than the sum of the parts that we had with BEIS and with DIT.
Okay, that sounds all very plausible. But in the beginning, and you did mention the first of the Trade Secretaries, Liam Fox, and then we had Liz Truss, and we had Anne-Marie Trevelyan in the post before yourself. In the beginning, these trade deals were with the boosterism of the former Prime Minister. Signing their own trade policies around the world was going to make up and be changing. It was going to be better, actually, than being part of the European Union. Isn't this actually really a tacit admission by government that isn't true? And actually, those sort of promises that were made at the beginning, that the UK being free on the world to sign its own trade deals, really hasn't yielded very much in comparison to what's been lost.
No, I disagree with that, because what we're doing is changing as the world changes with us. There was no COVID pandemic and breakdown in supply chains when we first started exiting the EU. There was no Russia-Ukraine war and the significant damage that has done to energy prices. There was what the WTO Director General would call the fragmentation that is now emerging. So the world is changing, and we need to be able to respond to that. And I think that it's not helpful trying to look at everything we do as a replacement for EU trade. There's no Cold War with the EU. We haven't stopped trading. We have a free trading agreement. And one of the things that I try and emphasize is all of this is in addition to our trading relationship with the EU. We've never said that things didn't change and that some things didn't become more difficult, but we work on that. You look at what the Prime Minister did in France, for instance. We have a very, very healthy relationship with EU member countries. I was in Italy talking to my trade counterparts, and there's a lot of positivity towards the UK. But we cannot allow our entire foreign policy and trade policy to be decided by the EU. We are a services-based economy. distance is not necessarily the factor that it once used to be, but also where is the new middle class coming from? Where is the growth coming from in the world? It is in the Indo-Pacific, and that's why we are tilting to have a more global trading outlook. But we still need to recognize that there is a different economic environment internationally. Having business and trade integrated is not acknowledging that something has gone wrong. Far from it. It is what do we need to do next in order to continue to deliver the economic growth that the PM said was one of his priorities.
Okay, you said there's no Cold War, but certainly I think everybody and every observer would say there's been a trade cooling with Europe. And some of what you've laid out there about a growing middle class in different parts of the world is not mutually exclusive. You could have both. Your own government's, and I'm sure you know I was going to ask this because I've asked this to every Secretary of State, your own government's GDP figures for what you're losing and what you're gaining, and given that none of the trade deals are actually operational yet, can you tell us the balance of gain to loss from your own government's figures?
So I think you actually asked me this question
the last
time I was here, and I just see it completely differently. It is not a zero-sum game where we're doing something here and we've lost something with the EU. You can grow trade across both regions, and that is what we are doing. GDP figures are multivariate. They have lots of elements in them beyond trade. And I've talked about the shocks to trade policy or to the trading environment in the previous select committee. So I think that's how you need to look at what is going on rather than losing something from the EU in order to gain something with CPTPP. The EU could still join CPTPP, it might not. Other countries could do. So we need to look at what the potential is there, but also making sure that we have control over our trading relationships. And that's what's really good about this new agreement, that there's no loss of sovereignty, there is no parliament, there is no political integration. It is more like what the European economic community was. It's a trading community, and that's where we think the direction should be for the UK.
Use the phrase there, a zero-sum game. I think the zero-sum game would be a gain on what's happened, because it's been less than a zero-sum game. It's been a loss of GDP, and your own figures, Secretary of State, give you
which figures are you referring to?
There's OBR figures at 4%. The Treasury's published figures about 4.8, 4.9%. And the gains that you have flagged for the trade deals that aren't yet in operation are about 0.08, 0.08, I think 0.02 for New Zealand, 0.08 for Australia, 0.08 for CPTPP, and 0.02 for New Zealand. Now, if this was horse racing, these figures are equivalent to going to the races with £490 or £500 or £400, and betting that money and losing that money. To be told you're winning £8 and £8 and £2 means you've got £18. But the bookie's not yet paid out. Secretary of State, this isn't really a good way of economic stewardship for the government.
All right, so
of the United Kingdom.
So I think you know what I'm going to say next, which is I disagree with every single thing that you had. You
disagree with the government's figures.
but allow me to elaborate on why. So you talk about the WTO. You talk about the the OBR 4% figure. When I looked at that, because
it was lower than the government figure.
It's when I looked at that and tried to work out where they were getting this from, that is a figure which they base on us leaving the EU on WTO terms, which we didn't do. We left with a free trade agreement. So interrogating the figures and understanding what people are putting into their analysis is part of it. And it's one of the things, I think if we were having more committee sessions, I actually think it's one of the things that we need to look at. What is it that we're doing with these numbers? Because as a new Secretary of State coming in and asking questions and then being told, well, it's 0.08%, then interrogate the figures and you look at the assumptions that come into how they make the analysis. I just don't think that they would stack up in terms of how we're using them. What officials are doing with those numbers is different from what we are doing. And I used the phrase when I had the oral statement, a forecast is different from a model. We have a model that does not take into account that the figures we used for CPTPP, for example, It's based on 2014 figures. We still don't have the latest figures. It doesn't take into account potential growth of the economies that are there and their forecasts rather than a model. It doesn't take into account the new countries that are going to join CPTPP. But even if, so we can go into detail about whether the numbers are accurate.
We might get beyond 0.08, right. 0.09.
So no, and in fact, I would say that the models are binary calculations. And I came from a background in banking where people built models and others were free to interrogate them, and that was what improved the analysis. Whereas in Parliament, we treat these numbers as if they are sacred texts from on high, and no one dare quibble them. It is not in any way casting aspersions on any of the institutions, whether it's my own department or the OBR.
So is there any value in government modelling?
There is value because they give us a data point, but it is just one metric. What we need to do is then respond with actions on, well, if this is this correct? If not, what are we going to do? What is our strategy going to be? How do we evolve our policy? And that's what we're doing.
So basically, you're not running with the idea of models when the numbers are going against you. So I'll just, before I take in lawyers and more, just in the real world, do you think it's easier for companies, and do you think companies are trading more or less from the UK to the EU now than they were with this new regime?
Exports have gone up.
No, well, I'm talking about companies. Do you think there are any
what
companies?
You mean with the?
Do you think there are companies that find it difficult now to export and to trade with the European Union?
There are companies where the changes have had an impact on them. Our job is to try and reduce or remove that impact. What I'm not going to do is create a time machine and then go back and try and refight the referendum. I'm not interested in relitigating the referendum. The Prime Minister of the day campaigned to stay in the EU. The British public voted to leave. I am not having an argument about that democratic decision.
I'm not. I'm just asking if the companies find it easier or more difficult.
Relitigating the referendum.
That's not the red herring.
That is what you're doing.
No, I'm asking you: do companies find it easier or harder now?
Most companies have said they've had to make changes, and some have had
easier
impacts.
or harder.
No, so it depends on the company. There is no.
Some companies you think find it easier to trade with the EU than they did when they were in the EU.
There are some companies who do, and then there are others who have difficulty. What my job is at the moment, and it's one of the priorities which I've set out, is what can we do to make life easier.
But Secretary of State, with the greatest respect, some companies will think you're wishing a reality there.
No, I disagree. Companies speak to me and they tell me about what they would like us to do in terms of regulation now that we've left the EU. I think the challenge now is getting those benefits realised rather than spending time arguing about them over.
That means I have to move on. Much as I'd like to indulge myself further, I'll take in Lloyd Russell-Moyle briefly and then go over to Mick Whitley.
Thanks very much for watching that video all the way to the end. And if you liked it, I've got some better news for you. PoliticsJOE is in the process of launching a podcast. Live in a couple of weeks' time, it's called The Pubcast. Link below, probably somewhere in the comments or the description, something like that. Check it out, subscribe so you get ready for our first episode. It's coming soon. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, or any of those other slightly weirder platforms. See you soon.